Ukraine just bombed Russia's version of Amazon, and the intelligence story behind it is the part that nobody's talking about. So how did Ukraine know that WildBerries was transporting Russian military gear? Well, on July 18th, Ukrainian drones hit a Russian warehouse the size of 67 football fields. Not a military base, not an ammunition depot, a distribution center for WildBerries, Russia's largest online retailer. It's the company most people compare to Amazon. Fashion, electronics, home goods, the kind of place where a teenager in Krasnodar orders Adidas. The fire burned for 4 straight days, and here's what almost nobody covering this story has explained. Ukraine didn't hit a shopping warehouse by accident, and it didn't hit it because it looked vaguely industrial from altitude. Somewhere inside Ukrainian intelligence, an analyst traced a line from a burnt navigation component pulled out of a crashed Russian drone on Ukrainian soil, through customs paperwork, through importer records, all the way to a seller account on a consumer shopping app, and that line ended at a warehouse outside Moscow. Ukraine found the supply depot Russia's own volunteers had been hiding inside WildBerries, and then it burnt it down. Hey friends, Wes here, defense journalist, Army and Air Force veteran. Welcome to Studio Charlie, this new studio that I've put together. You've probably seen Studio Alpha, you've seen Bravo. This is Charlie. We'll hopefully throw this into the rotation. I post 4 videos a week, which means I need multiple different spots to film from to keep it fresh for you guys. Today we're covering the WildBerries strikes and the intelligence trail that had to exist for Ukraine to know where to point the boom in the first place. Now here's the assumption most of the coverage in this story is working from, and it's backwards. The instinct is to treat this as a drone story. Ukraine struck a warehouse, here's the damage, here's the death toll, moving on. Well, that framing misses the actual significance entirely. The real story isn't that Ukraine can build long-range drones capable of reaching a target 360 kilometers from the border. Ukraine has demonstrated that capability repeatedly for over a year. The real story is that Ukraine's intelligence apparatus figured out that an ordinary consumer shopping platform had quietly become part of Russia's military supply chain, then built a forensic pipeline precise enough to confirm it and target it specifically. That's a detective story, and understanding how that detective story likely worked tells you something alarming about how fragile Russia's improvised war economy actually is. Let me lay out the confirmed sequence, because the scale of this campaign grew significantly over the following 2 weeks. On the night of July 17th into the 18th, Ukrainian drones struck 2 major WildBerries logistics centers simultaneously: Elektrostral outside Moscow and Kutovsk in Tambov Oblast, roughly 360 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. The Elektrostral facility covers more than 360,000 square meters and employs over 8,000 people. WildBerries founder Tatiana Kim had described it as the company's largest and most technologically advanced logistics center, the site where she boasted to a Kremlin-aligned outlet about testing autonomous delivery vehicles between warehouse buildings. The Kutovsk facility, which opened in May of 2025, served as a key logistics hub for Russia's entire Central Federal District and stored up to 54 million items. Casualty figures from that first night vary slightly across sources, which is normal in the early days of any strike, but the range sits between 8 and 9 dead, somewhere north of 70 injured, with 7 of the Kutovsk deaths coming from the overnight shift. Then the campaign continued. On July 20th, Ukraine struck Kalydina, also in Moscow Oblast. Then on the night of July 21st into the 22nd, drones hit major hubs in Krasnodar and Novinnuminsk in the Stravo Polkre, killing at least 1 more worker and injuring 9. By the time the wave finished, Ukraine had struck WildBerries facilities in at least 6 Russian regions, including a storage hub in occupied Crimea, hitting somewhere around 10% of the company's total storage capacity. Russian analysts have estimated total economic damage from the campaign at up to 100 billion rubles, roughly 1.3 billion US dollars, making it one of the costliest strikes on Russian commercial infrastructure since the war began. Restoration estimates for just the 2 initial facilities run as high as 35.8 billion rubles, close to $457 million. There's also an uglier detail that's emerged since the initial reporting. Multiple accounts, later compiled on Wikipedia's summary of the strikes, described chaotic evacuations at the burning facilities. Workers alleged that fire alarms weren't raised until flames were already spreading wildly, that some supervisors kept employees inside rather than organizing an evacuation, and that workers were ordered to return to their barcode scanners before being allowed to leave the building. One labor organizer speculated the delay may have reflected management's concern that employees would steal goods during the chaos rather than concern for their safety. Now, here's the part of this story that explains why a shopping warehouse became a legitimate military target in the first place. Russia's formal defense industry still handles major weapons programs, but the day-to-day equipment needs of individual drone units, flight controllers, motors, fiber optic spools, thermal sights, those often move through a completely different channel. Private manufacturers, volunteer fundraising groups, and ordinary online marketplaces coordinated through Telegram. Defense Ministry procurement moves slowly, so volunteer-funded purchasing fills that gap. Ukraine relies on a similar model itself out of necessity. I've personally used a platform called Car for Ukraine to help fund 2 vehicles that were then up-armored and delivered directly to frontline drone units. You guys help with that. That was a fundraiser we ran right here on YouTube. No government bureaucracy involved. But Ukraine is a small country improvising against a larger invader. Russia, using this same bootstrapping doctrine, used to be ranked among the world's most powerful militaries before this war started. The fact that Russian soldiers are being equipped through that same civilian bootstrapping model that a besieged smaller nation uses tells you something uncomfortable about the actual state of Russian military logistics. Now, during research for this story, monitoring WildBerries' own public catalog turned up 178 listings for fiber optic drone spools and 444 listings for drone drop equipment, some explicitly marked as compatible with VOG-17 and VOG-25 grenade rounds, alongside flight controllers, motors, electronic speed controllers, thermal sights, and body armor. All of that, by the way, has since been scrubbed from the platform. Searching those same terms today mostly returns fiber supplements like Metamucil. Now, a pro-Russian Telegram channel called Alex Parker Returns confirmed the pattern from the inside, describing WildBerries as a major source of military and dual-use goods that volunteers routinely purchase for active combat operations. That same channel warned before these strikes that hitting WildBerries' warehouses would seriously damage frontline supply. He wasn't wrong. Ukraine has spent years getting skilled at specific kinds of forensic work, taking apart the wreckage of Russian drones and missiles and reading the components like evidence. Well, Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Agency maintains something called the War and Sanctions Portal, built specifically to trace recovered Russian weapons components back to their original manufacturers. Ukrainian officials have said they've handed foreign governments hundreds of serial numbers pulled from downed drones and missiles so those countries' own companies can trace exactly how their components ended up in a Russian missile. A single navigation module recovered from a crashed drone can carry a manufacturer's name, model numbers, serial numbers, production date, distributor markings, firmware information, and import labels. Each one of those details is a thread. Follow enough threads through Russian customs records, and you eventually reach a Russian importer. Importers sell to someone. If that someone turns out to be a WildBerries seller account, the chain closes. The plausible reconstruction looks something like this. Ukraine recovers a component from a downed drone. The model number identifies the manufacturer. Customs records identify the Russian importer. Corporate records connect that importer to a specific marketplace seller account. The seller's WildBerries listings reveal their full product catalog. Inventory and shipping patterns indicate which regional warehouse holds that stock. Procurement patterns or human intelligence connect the goods to specific Russian units. No Ukrainian official has publicly confirmed that exact sequence, and there are obvious operational security reasons why they wouldn't. But every individual piece of that chain is independently documented as something Ukraine has built and used for years. When I was in the Air Force, the discipline that the E3 Century trains into you isn't really any single sensor. It's about fusion, taking scattered, individually incomplete pieces of data from radar, from signals intelligence, from other aircraft, from ground stations, and assembling them into one coherent picture that's more accurate than any single source could produce alone. Well, the WildBerries operation, if it worked the way the evidence suggests, is exactly that discipline applied to a completely different domain. No individual piece of it is exotic. Recovered wreckage components are standard practice. Customs records are public or semi-public in most jurisdictions. Marketplace listings are literally public. Volunteer fundraising posts bragging about deliveries are posted voluntarily by the people running the supply chain, functioning as free documentation nobody intended to publish. What makes this impressive isn't any single data source, it's the fusion. Somebody built the discipline to hold all of those threads simultaneously and follow them to a single address. That's the same skill I spent years building a career around, just aimed at a completely different kind of target. WildBerries' own developer documentation confirms that seller accounts with proper credentials can pull inventory reports broken down by specific item, specific warehouse, and specific quantity, refreshed as often as every 30 minutes. WildBerries knows exactly which box sits on which shelf in which building at nearly any given moment, the same way Amazon's warehouse system does. The public can't see any of that directly, so accessing it requires a seller's own login credentials or API access tied to a real account. Whether Ukraine compromised that system directly, ran a front company through it, or recruited someone with legitimate access is unknown and may never be confirmed publicly. But what is confirmed is that after the strikes, sellers were advised to pull their own warehouse-specific inventory reports from July 17th, the day before the attacks, specifically to determine whether their own stock had been sitting in Elektrostral or Kutovsk when the drones arrived. That single detail confirms the granularity of this data exists and that it's queryable after the fact by anyone with legitimate access. And here's what actually deserves scrutiny, and it's a narrower question than the sensational version of this story. We don't know Ukraine's exact intelligence sequence. No Ukrainian official has walked a reporter through the precise chain from wreckage to warehouse. And they shouldn't, because that's OPSEC. What we know is that every individual capability required to build that chain, wreckage analysis, customs tracing, marketplace monitoring, human recruitment inside Russian logistics, is independently documented as something Ukraine has developed and used over the course of this war. The stronger question isn't whether Ukraine could theoretically build this chain. We know it can. It's whether hitting 8 warehouses across 6 regions, 10% of WildBerries' total footprint, meaningfully degrades Russia's improvised military supply network, or whether Russian volunteer procurement simply migrates to other platforms and rebuilds within weeks. That's the real uncertainty, and it's a more useful question than whether Ukraine hacked Amazon. Now, commercial logistics networks are resilient by design. WildBerries itself has already resumed limited operations at Kutovsk since July 23rd. Degrading one node in a distributed civilian fundraising supply model buys time and cost, not permanent denial. Modern commercial logistics networks, whether it's WildBerries or Amazon or any other platform built around national warehousing, inventory tracking, payment processing, and last-mile delivery, provide every structural element an improvised war economy needs, available for rent through a consumer account, with none of the paperwork a formal military procurement contract would require. That convenience is exactly why Russian volunteers migrated their supply chain onto a shopping platform in the first place. It was faster, cheaper, and reached every corner of the country more reliably than Russia's own defense procurement system. But capitalism runs on information. Every commercial transaction on a platform like WildBerries generates a data trail. Seller accounts, buyer accounts, shipping destinations, inventory logs, the same convenience that let a volunteer in Moscow order a fiber optic cable for his cousin's drone unit with 2 clicks, left a digital record behind every one of those clicks. Russia moved a meaningful slice of its war economy onto infrastructure built for tracking because that infrastructure was efficient. Well, efficiency and traceability turned out to be the same feature, viewed from 2 different angles. For years, Ukraine has watched Western journalists and OSINT researchers document American and European components turning up inside downed Russian missiles and drones, and watched almost nothing happen in response. Export controls got tightened on paper, corporations issued statements. The components kept arriving anyways, through middlemen, through gray markets, through exactly the kind of supply chain nobody wanted to spend the money policing. Well, Ukraine apparently decided it had the means to stop asking Western companies to fix their own supply chains and started targeting the distributors directly. And somewhere between a burnt circuit board in a Ukrainian field and a warehouse floor 360 kilometers inside Russia, an analyst found the thread and followed it all the way to the building. That's the company Russia's volunteer war economy chose as its supply depot, one that valued inventory over the people standing next to it when the fire started. Ukraine found the building, and Russia's own management decided what mattered more once it was burning. Okay, that's it for today, my friends. If this was useful, and only after I've earned your trust, then subscribing is the best free way to support what I do here. I cover Ukraine's intelligence and asymmetric warfare campaigns 4 times a week. And by the way, I hope this new studio here is... Oh, yes, I am wearing shorts and a coat because it is cold in here. I hope this new studio was cool. It took a while to build, but everything in here is real, it's tangible, it's not a green screen. It is pretty fun to do the set decoration stuff. I hope you enjoy it. Next video will be in a different studio, though. We got to shake it up a little bit. And as always, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Crimea is Ukraine.